social divides, regional divides, ethnic divides, and those have been very persistent over time. And that I think is one of the sort of the factors behind, not just this election, but previous elections too.
Welcome everybody to another edition of Sustainable LatAm, a podcast that analyzes all the geopolitical, economic, and social trends in Latin America. With me, I have, as always, Andrew Thompson, journalist like me. We both are co-presenting this podcast, and today we are honored by the presence of Professor John Crabtree. John is an academic expert in Latin America with a long history of analyzing the Andean countries, especially Bolivia and Peru and Ecuador. He is currently a research associate at the LAC and senior member of St. Anthony's College in University of Oxford. He also provides services to Oxford Analytical, and Oxford is visiting researcher to Oxford Brookes University. He has several publications. One of the latest one is Business Power and the State in the Central Andes. That is a compare of Bolivia, Ecuador, and Peru, published in 2023. He's also wrote in 2017 Peru, Elite Power and Political Capture, and several other publications. John, it's a real pleasure to have with us today. I will give you a little bit the mic just to talk a little bit before we go into the questions. But first of all, well, thank you for being with us. And how about if you tell a little bit more about you to our audience?
Okay, well, I've taught at the Latin American Center at Oxford University for many years now, and with a specialism, as you mentioned, specialism in Peruvian and Bolivian politics, but also extending a little bit more widely than that. But those are the main focuses of my research interests. And when you're dealing with my CV, I might mention, by birth, a little bit of advertisement, that I have a book, an edited book, which is coming out in a couple of weeks' time, published by Routledge, on mining in Peru. It's titled "Be Mining and the Peruvian State." So it's it's a look at the way in which the mining industry has evolved in Peru, and whether or not it can resolve some of the problems that it's had over the last 25 years over the next, in which, of course, it'll be the great beneficiary of the energy transition and a huge demand that there will be for copper. So that's, if any of your viewers are interested, that book will appear in the next, it's published on the 11th of May.
Well, first of all, congratulations. And yeah, definitely we are going to acquire the book, and once it is published, probably we're going to have another conversation talking about the book. Well, let's jump to business, and I will give the mic a little bit to Andrew to give a little bit of summary of what is the topic of today in our podcast. Andrew, go ahead, please.
Right, this is kind of a topic and a question for John that I'd really like answered. I can be quite an impressionistic person, and looking at the first round of the ballot in Peru on the 12th of April last, it's being described as chaos. It's being described as fraudulent, although there's not much evidence backing it up. Some votes have gone missing. One candidate has offered cash payments for voting denunciations of fraud, and we still don't have a formal result. So my question is, was it really that bad, or by reference to other countries and other periods in Peru, was it a reasonable sort of election to try and take the temperature of Peru as a nation?
But as you said, there was no formal denunciation of fraud by the observers that went to Peru, including those of the European Union. What there was a certain amount of administrative chaos, partly by virtue of the fact that the sheer number of candidates which the electoral authorities have had to cater for. I mean, there were 35 presidential candidates, which is twice the number last time, which in itself was a record. So and then you're talking about not just candidates for the presidency, but also for the 2 vice presidencies, for 60 members of the Senate and 130 members of the Chamber of Deputies. So it's a huge administrative task, and there were certainly major problems on the election day in terms of the supply of ballot papers and other materials to the polling booth in various parts of Lima, and also in various parts in some cities in the United States. So this was a major hiccup, and the voting had to be in those areas had to continue the following day. So it was, even then, when the results of the elections were coming in, voting was continuing. So in that sense, there was a certain amount of irregularity. There have, as you say, been claims of fraud. Claims of fraud are not absent from Peruvian elections. You may recall that in the most recent, the 2021 elections, Keiko Fujimori, the losing candidate in the second round, claimed to be the victim of fraud. Of course, no evidence was ever produced to that end, and no evidence has actually been produced as yet that to back up the claims of fraud, which are coming mainly from the sort of populist right, in particular from Rafael Lopez Aliaga, who has been said that the procedure would be fraudulent even before the elections began. So I mean, there is a discourse of fraud here, which echoes to a certain extent some of the kind of Trumpian politics which we've seen in the United States. You know, there are patterns here that to delegitimize the results when you think you're going to lose, you claim fraud. So certainly there have been administrative irregularities, and those are quite serious. And indeed, the head of the ONPI, the organization which administers the elections in Peru, has now been forced to resign, which is an unusual step, because the position is not supposed to be resignable during the process of an election. But he has long been the target of criticism, both by the supporters of Keiko Fujimori and of Lopez Aliaga, who have been gunning him for him for years now. So it's not surprising, but they have the chief public prosecutor on their side. So then he is the person who is now claiming that he has to go into some preliminary detention, which, I mean, this is all getting quite serious, I think, in terms of repercussions. And one of the candidates, Roberto Sanchez, who might be going forward to the second election, we don't know yet, is saying that he's going to mobilize support in defense of Corbeto, the head of the OMPI.
Right. I've also heard that Lopez Aliaga has called for, I think the words used was a civil insurgency. He had some very dramatic descriptions of what should happen next.
Well, this is all, it sort of has Trumpian echoes, doesn't it? I mean, this is, we've heard this before. And there are a number of ways in which I think that Lopez Aliaga's campaign has sort of picked up on the Trumpian playbook. Also, I mean, echoed in various other sort of candidates, if you might call the populist right, in other parts of the world.
John, let me jump in there. It's really interesting what is happening in Peru, but it's not an unusual history in elections in Peru. If we remember a little bit, the time that it takes to get results are sometimes it's quite long. It happens in 2021 as well. So a little bit my question is, why Peru is so complicated to manage, or take so long to manage an election, plus all of this situation? And what is the impact in terms of political stability in the country?
Yeah, well, the system is not digitalized, so which takes longer. There are communities which are very remote, which takes time sometimes to get the vote in from those. It's a system whereby the various people who observe the elections from different political parties are able to impugn the results. And there are a large number of results which are now being impugned. I'm not sure exactly who's doing the impugning, but there are quite a lot of, and it takes a special section of the electoral courts to go through these things one by one. I mean, often the results, the things are like, the totals don't add up, or the people are supposed to sign the ballot the tally have put their signatures in the wrong place. Those kind of procedural problems, which are certainly common in Peruvian elections, and probably much less so when elections are digitalized. But so it does take a long time. In this particular case, it's taking a long time because we simply don't know that the position for who goes forward to the second round is so narrow between Roberto Sanchez and Rafael Lopez Aliaga as to be having to be extraordinarily careful in terms of the way in which they're conducting the count. So, I mean, at the moment, I was looking at the figures just now. We were on nearly 95% of votes counted, and there are with Fujimori on 17%. So she goes forward anyway to the second round, and the gap between Sanchez and Lopez Aliaga is nail-bitingly close. I mean, it's only 17,000 votes in it. Amongst a voting public of 28 million, so it's tiny, and it could go either way. When there are about sort of 5,000 or so ballot tallies which are being observed and looked at the moment, and really the result could go either way. So we don't know who Keiko will go forward into a second round with, whether it's Sanchez or whether it's Lopez Aliaga, and the results the nature of the second round will be very different depending who goes forward in the end.
Yeah, exactly. You were mentioning this. The difference is so narrow, but that is basically picturing two possible scenarios. A scenario that is going to be right, conservative right, and far right. That's one possible scenario, or right, left, and the polarization that is a little bit historical in certain parts of Peru as well. But it's not only that. In terms of governability, for whoever wins the second round, and even in these two scenarios, we are going to see again a very fragmented Congress. And how it's going to impact, even with these two scenarios, the governability of the country and the managing of the country. 8 presidents already is complicated.
I think that the Congress will be less fragmented than the previous one. Now, we've got this for the first time, they're reintroducing the Senate. And I think that we don't know what the seat allocation will be in any precise terms, but it's probably only 4 parties which will be represented in the Senate, which are actually past the 5% required, 5% of the vote which is required to achieve representation. So that's going to reduce the number of parties quite considerably. Now, of course, those parties can split into little bits because the parties aren't solid, and which is, of course, to a certain extent, what happened in the previous Congress. I mean, probably in the Chamber of Deputies, you may get 6 parties or something like that. It's not clear, just not entirely clear how many there will be, but it'll probably be less than the previous Congress, at least at the outset. I mean, in the previous Congress, for example, Peru Libre, which is the party that won the 2021 elections, has now fragmented into about 4 or 5 sort of little sub parties, all of which have their own agendas and have led to a degree of chaos. So also the reintroduction of the Senate has an important implications for the possibilities of impeachment. Now, we have seen in the last 10, no, whoever gets elected, this time will be the 9th president in only 10 years. There have been impeachment has become a kind of customary device, which it was never intended to be amongst the constitution makers. But it's been used repeatedly to get rid of unpopular or to get rid of presidents who don't follow what the majority in Congress want. So I think that now with 2 chambers, it has to go through 2 chambers. It has to get 2/3 of the vote in both chambers for an impeachment to be valid. So it's actually maybe slightly less volatile going forward than has been the case in the last 5 years.
Well, that can be reading as good news for Peru and whoever wants to do business in Peru, which paradoxically, as you follow Peru, is really interesting to see the resilience of the Peruvian economy, regardless the political uncertainty.
Well, the Peruvian economy is booming. Well, not booming, but it's about 3.1% or something like that. It's doing better than the average for the rest of Latin America, for sure. But I mean, with prices of minerals where they're at the moment, particularly for copper and gold, which are the 2 things that Peru produces most of, it's not surprising that there's that there are an economic uplift as a result of that. But I mean, to a certain extent, as you're suggesting, there is a sort of autonomy between what goes on in Peruvian politics and the way in which the economy works. And even Castillo, president of the left-wing president who won in 2021 and was ousted at the end of 2022, even he didn't really upset the economic model. I mean, he came in with lots of promises to be nationalizing anything, but ended up not being able to do anything at all. So, I mean, even candidates of the left are fairly restricted in what they can actually get away with.
Should Roberto Sanchez win, would there be a situation where he's, if you like, criticized by the markets for spending a lot? I think he's promised to increase education and health spending, major expansion of free university education. Is that something that business worries about, or do they think he would be quite comfortably contained by Congress?
Well, the first question is whether he will win. I mean, if he's going against Keiko Fujimori, it'll be a polarized campaign. Whether or not Sanchez is able to pull together the kind of anti-Fujimori coalition, which has deprived Keiko of the presidency. Now, this is the fourth successive election in which she's narrowly lost against a coalition of people who have. I have my doubts. I mean, I think that if I have to put a bet on it, I would think that in a Keiko versus Sanchez contest, I would think that Keiko would probably prevail. I think that he would spend a lot of ammunition trying to denigrate Sanchez and to make him look as if he's a dangerous radical. And then, irrespective of what he said in the campaign, I mean, one has to sort of interpret that with some caution. It isn't necessarily what's actually going to happen. I mean, everybody makes exaggerated campaigns in election claims or election promises in election campaigns, but don't necessarily, when they actually achieve office, aren't able to actually fulfill any of those promises. I mean, Castillo was a case in point in this regard. He failed to do anything pretty much in the time he was in office. Certainly, if he did win the election, which I think is on balance probably improbable, but it might happen. It could happen. I mean, there's certainly those parties. There are the degree of the anti-Fujimori. No, if you look at the polls, that the solidity of the anti-Fujimori sentiment is very solid. I mean, it's those people who say they would never ever ever vote for Fujimori is higher than for most other candidates. But it depends, I think, on whether or not you can actually pull together a kind of a coalition which is able to stop her. I mean, of course, in the first round, she only got 17%. So there's an awful lot to play for. So one would assume that in a Fujimori versus Sanchez contest, I mean, all those who voted for Lopez Aliaga would vote for would switch their votes to Fujimori, or at least the great majority. I have to imagine just about all of them, probably. But there are also a lot of other sort of right and center-right candidates who didn't make it from the first round, who will also presumably, I think, can be relied upon to provide a certain amount of grist to the Fujimori mill. So I suspect that on balance, I think that probably Fujimori would win an election. And even if she didn't, I don't think that Sanchez would have much leeway in which to really to pursue very radical policies. That answers your question.
John, yes, thank you. First of all, I want to welcome Julian, our third co-host who just joined us. Julian, welcome. Julian is our economic analyst in Sustainable LatAm. He always view all the perspective of as an investor of what is going around, and probably he's going to make a couple of questions while we develop on this. But I want to jump in one thing. We have talked about the resilience of the economy, certain scenarios, and a scenario, probably scenario of Sanchez, Fujimori. But talking about resilience, we are talking about Fujimori. Fourth election is going around that, and a persistence of Fujimorismo in Peru, highly resisted for one side, but highly supported on the other through the years, despite all the controversies that's going around Fujimorismo. Can you help us understand why is so powerful the Fujimorismo in Peru?
Yes, well, it goes back, I think, to the legacy of Keiko Fujimori's father, Alberto Fujimori, and to which she put quite a lot of emphasis in the campaign about Fujimori father's success in stabilizing the economy in the 1990s, liberalizing the economy, making it a very business-friendly economy, and was very successful in terms of stimulating a return to growth and so forth, but also in terms of suppressing Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path, which they have, the Fujimoristas have continually invoked the legacy of Alberto Fujimori in that regard, in terms of bringing and in opposing attempts by the human rights community to submit members of the armed forces to judicial remedy of one kind or another. So I think there's been the legacy of Fujimori father is strong, though of course as time goes by, an increasing number of electors would not even have been born during the time of Fujimori. So that I think that effect diminishes over time. But she's time, I think, has put together and compared with Lopez Aliaga, has played a more how should I say, quieter game. She has not been as vitriolic as Lopez Aliaga in terms of claims of fraud and so forth. She's behaved if you might use the term, in a slightly more statesman-like or statesperson-like, I should say, way, and has avoided the kind of histrionics of campaigning. And I think that's probably brought us some credit amongst people. And of course, I think to a certain extent, in as much as Lopez Aliaga has sort of tried to outdo her on the far right, she has managed to sort of appeal to a more more centrist opinion. Now, of course, the party which Keiko set up, Fuerza Popular, is, I would think, the organized political party in Peru these days. I mean, and that's perhaps overemphasizing it a little, no, exaggerating a little bit as to the other political parties are simply personal vehicles of individual politicians. Fuerza Popular does have some sort of organized presence across Peru. Lopez Aliaga, for example, who was previously the mayor of Lima before he gave up to campaign for the presidency. His base is pretty solidly Lima. He doesn't, if you look at the voting returns, very few people outside Lima have much time for Lopez Aliaga. Whereas Fuerza Popular and Keiko Fujimori, its leader, has quite a strong presence throughout the country, and he's managed to build a kind of electoral machinery in conjunction often with sort of local politicians, which has actually been quite durable over time. And of course, I think that the experience of the last 5 years shows that Fuerza Popular is one of the few fairly disciplined political organizations in Peru in terms of its presence in Congress. It has not suffered in the internal splits that most other parties have suffered, which have led to a kind of a total fragmentation of political representation in the Chamber of Deputies. So I think those are some of the elements that sort of help explain her persistence. And of course, you know, she's not a person without degrees of, she has various charges out against her. She's been in jail for quite a lengthy period of time over allegedly receiving large campaign contributions as part of the Lava Jato scandal, and contributions which were never properly admitted to the electoral authorities. Those charges against her, partly because of the way in which she's managed to control, or Fuerza Popular has managed to exercise a degree of control over the judiciary over this period, has led to the fact that the charges against her have effectively been quashed. So I mean, she's quite she's somebody who has had severe legal problems against her, but I think to a certain extent those have tended to subside a bit in people's minds over the last year or so.
Andrew, Julian, time for you to jump in.
Right, I've got a quick question. I don't want to steal time from Julian, but if just following on from what you were saying, John, if Keiko wins through, will Lopez Aliaga be a collaborative coalition partner for her, or will he be much more, if you like, adversary?
I mean, he himself won't be represented in the Congress, but I think that probably, I mean, ideologically, there's not much to divide. You know, there's not an awful lot to divide between the two of them. I mean, they've had the differences over the last 5 years, but there have been a lot of collaboration between Fuerza Popular and Lopez Aliaga's party too, so which have, you know, between them really managed to steer things through the Congress. I mean, they have with one or two other people, had an effective majority of conservative majority in the Congress, and I would think that that would probably persist. I mean, he may or may not have presidential ambitions in 2031, you know, but who knows what will happen then? But that's a long way off yet. And I would think that given the sort of quite strong representation of centre-left and left parties, I mean, there will be, even if Keiko wins, there will be quite a strong representation in both houses of both houses of the legislature of centrist and left of centre parties. So they won't necessarily have it all their own way. I mean, to give you some idea, I mean, it's calculated that probably Fujimori would have 21 seats in the 60-seat Senate, and Sanchez would probably have about 15, and Lopez Aliaga would probably have about 9, and then but the rest of it would be made up of more centrist and centre left, but it won't necessarily be an absolute majority, and it may be difficult to, you know, so I suspect that probably there will be a degree of collaboration between Fujimori and Lopez Aliaga's party, Renovación Popular.
Right, this is.
One thing we might talk about before we talk about the economy is the sort of international aspects of this, because Peru is a country in which depends an awful lot on China. I mean, it's the major investor, it's the major market for minerals, and its relationships with the United States is under pressure. An indication of this has been, an incidents that have taken place in recent days, in fact, over the acquisition of American F-16 jet fighters. And this has led, I just announced earlier today to the resignation of the Minister of Defense. There seems to have been a major ructions between the Ministry of Defense and the armed forces on the one hand, and the president, who is, or the interim president, who is saying that this deal should be is too big and too important to be legitimately agreed by him, and it would be better to postpone it until, you know, a government is in place. This has created all sorts of ructions with the U.S. Embassy, and the ambassador, Trump's ambassador, has been fairly vocal in terms of expressing his points of view in terms of the importance of this deal going through, over the heads of other possible suppliers who are also complaining that they've been sidelined by the United States. This is a French producer, Rafael, and to Saab in Sweden, and so it's. Peru is in a bind because it wants, on the one hand, to maintain close relations with the United States, but at the same time is not going to be pushed around that much in terms of endangering its relationship with China. And one of the flashpoints here has been the port of Chancay, which is built by the Chinese for the Chinese, basically, and whether or not this is. There's been a polemic, an ongoing polemic, over to the extent to which the Peruvian authorities actually exercise any control over what happens in the port of Chancay. And this has been, again, a flashpoint in relationships between Washington and Lima. So I just add that in as a sort of extra element.
No, that's right. In our latest episode, when Andrew, Julian, and I were talking about this game, geopolitical games that is playing China and the US, and Peru is part of these pressures going around that, and probably from what you're saying and what we are seeing, more pressure from the US are going to come. I don't think China is going to let this easily go because it has invested for many years. Julian was saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, Julian, but the interest of China in Peru are quite high. They have invested a lot of money, and I don't think they're going to just let it go around. On the other side, the level of pressure of the US could be high, but how much capability to maneuver are going to have the US government with such a strong presence of China through the years is a question going on. Julian, I don't know what you're seeing on that.
Yeah, I mean, we
Right,
know China is the main partner for Peru, as John was saying, and we're talking more than double of it of exports to China compared to the US. So there's several billions that the US need to fill up if they want to compete with China, which they may do. Now, Peru is rich in copper, is rich in iron, is rich in a whole range of minerals that could be of interest, and certainly the Trump administration has been very active across the continent to secure. We just saw some big deals coming into Lula's Brazil, so they are very active. I'm really interested to hear this. So I hadn't I didn't catch the F-16s or the scandal there, but of course it's everything. All of this is there's immense pressure, as we know. If you go south of the border, there's pressure. If you go further south, there's pressure and huge support. And Peru is in between countries which have somewhat turned more in more recent years. So we'll see what happened in with the port. We'll see if we understand that things are moving very fast in Latin America from what we can see, and it'd be good to see what happens in these elections. I think that if you remember, as we discussed earlier, Alberto, when I was asked last time who's going to win, I didn't want to commit because I couldn't see anything. I wasn't totally sure, but yeah, it's.
I would assume that if Keiko wins the election, that the room for manoeuvre for adopting an anti-China policy is very limited. I mean, it'll be particularly interesting to see what happens in Chile. I mean, with Cast is also in the same sort of bind. Chile also depends on hugely on China as a market and for its copper. I mean, how far is they going to jeopardize? There's a limit to which, but I think what will be happening is that the Peruvian administrations will be looking to be sort of help trying to meet the demands of Washington in other spheres, like, for example, buying military hardware from them, which of course locks them into a kind of into a defensive logic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot depends on a lot depends. There's, for better words, I'll be quite brutal. We are in a third Cold War, a Cold War between China and the US, which is manifesting itself across many countries. In LatAm, we can see it in a variety of where the US is securing a lot of places and making moves. And underlying this, we come back to what is the US after? And so from what we can see in the discussions on the economics part, I'm not talking about the politics, which is to some extent, I think, from my view, it's pretty relevant in the Trumpian administration. It's actually securing everything which is linked to energy, to critical minerals, resources, rare earth minerals, and of course LatAm in itself is its closest, and it's something that we it's not it's the Trump doctrine these days. I can't remember what the name is, but certainly they are much more aggressive in all of these in securing the rights, and this is where it comes to competing. And on the other hand, they are attacking China indirectly in many ways, and we can see that China needed commodities massively for the last 2 decades, more or less, because of its massive investments in, in its growth development, but that's fading away. Real estates fell in China, that is, real estate prices fell by 30-40%. There's been a huge backlogs of things to be built which haven't been built. So to some extent, there's a rebalancing at the moment happening, and this is what I'm saying. So if we have exports to China from Peru of 23 billion or so, and exports to the US of 9 billion, again, there's many billions to catch up. But maybe there is maybe there will be. Maybe the US is prepared to actually make the investments. Certainly, I know of private equity firms, US private equity firms, who are active in the Peruvian landscape, perhaps not directly in minerals, but in other things. So it's there. It just needs to.
And Peru's capacity to produce rare earths and other strategic minerals is, I think, probably largely unknown at the moment. I mean, what is known is, there certainly are certain strategic minerals which have been identified and which can be, which will be important in the future, even if they're not actually very important in terms of production at the moment. I mean, one of the areas, of course, is lithium. Peru is not one of the lithium triangle countries, but it has proven reserves of lithium. It's rock lithium rather than so it's a mining venture in Puno, which could be quite important. We don't quite know. I mean, the Canadian company has been investing in this. Production hasn't begun as yet. Quite when it will, I'm not sure. But I mean, Peru's potential as a producer of strategic minerals is very potentially important. I mean, Peru as a producer of copper has fallen. I mean, we used to be the world's second largest producer of copper after Chile. It's now sort of fallen back into third place after the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Right.
But, and investment in mining has suffered, I think, because of political instabilities and in recent times. But I rather suspect it'll pick up, if the demand for strategic minerals is as important as it's touted to be, because simply in terms of copper, the world demand for copper will almost certainly increase significantly, and Peru has a major possibilities of opening up new copper mines.
Going back a little bit with sorry, Andrew, just a little question on that. Coming back a little bit to what are the geopolitical pressures around that. So far, we have been an election that reflects a little bit the polarization in the country, left, right, but also these differences between Lima and the rest of the regions. But in terms of international element, can we expect, especially for the second round that is coming, regardless who is going to be in the second round, can we expect more interference, like it happens in Honduras, for example, with the Trump government? Can we expect this kind of pressure in Peru for the coming months for the elections?
The United States enjoys more leverage in smaller countries. And Peru is not a small country in Latin America. I mean, it's not one of the biggest, obviously, but it's a sizable country. It's a country with a long and quite proud tradition of independence, and is not likely to be quite so susceptible to the kind of maneuverings that can take place in Honduras or Guatemala or other countries of Central America, where the role of the United States has always had a much more direct impact on policy making than countries in most of South America. And I would say that it's probably less susceptible to pressure than say in Ecuador, for example, where under Noboa once seen very clear moves towards accommodating U.S. interests, including the resuscitation of the air base in Manta, which is important, amongst other things, for drug control. Peru, on that particular point, in Peru, it should be, we need to remember, is the world's second largest producer of coca, still is, and it's proved very difficult to control coca production. But Peru has never had the kind of stick that Colombia or Bolivia have had in terms of the difficulties of controlling coca. The United States have avoided the kind of rhetoric which was being common under the Mas administration in Bolivia or more recently in Colombia on the drug issue. But I mean, this is an area where the future governments will seek to be accommodating towards Washington. This is not an unimportant sphere of policy so far as Washington's concerned.
Right. I wanted to jump in quickly, going back to the election. Crime and security figured very prominently in Chancay.
Yeah.
I just wondered, do you see the approach changing under a new government, or will it still be, if you like, quite a lot of Mano and focus on putting down crime directly rather than in social work and other approaches?
Well, you're right. I mean, the issue of security has been a key one in the election, and one in which the parties on the sort of centre and centre right have made a great deal of emphasis, and it is a serious problem. I mean, it's not only a serious problem, but it's a problem that's got a good deal worse over the last few years. It's not quite on the same scale, I would say, as Ecuador. I mean, the degree of capture by drug organizations isn't so complete. Much of the feelings of insecurity is much more related to more common crime, particular extortion by various organizations of relatively small scale producers, bus drivers and the like. This is it's not so much sort of narco crime, although that is it does impact, but it's something that is widely felt amongst the population. Now the problem is that up to now we hear of Mano Dura and trying to emulate El Salvador. I don't think this is quite as easy to do in a big country like Peru as it is in a small country like El Salvador. I mean, the usual response is to create what's called states of emergency for 60 days or whatever, which make very little difference. And one of the problems, I think, one of the serious problems is the inefficiency of the police force. I mean, the police force is rather than being part of the solution, is part of the problem. And corruption in the police force is very widespread. So I think this is something that's very difficult to root out. I mean, quite what the policy solutions would be to creating a more calmer kind of society is by no means obvious. I mean, I don't think building more jails is the answer. It may deter some, but it's not, or trying to adopt the kind of hard-hitting policies which have been used elsewhere. I'm not sure are going to be that effective in terms of getting on top of common criminality, which, as I say, has expanded a lot in the last 5 to 10 years.
Right. This is
much felt by the voting public too.
Right. This is.
Yeah. Well, as Andrew reminded, and you already said, crime is probably high in the level of worries of the population, and has been seen in the elections rhetoric a little bit. Is one of the main areas that the common populations has expressed their concern. But I will emulate Andrew in that area. How much is perception and how much is reality in terms of crime on Peru when you're seeing the numbers?
Yeah, I'd just like to wrestling with somebody trying to make a phone call to me.
It's all right. I will do very quick because we are almost at the end. But emulating a little bit, Andrew, we know that crime is one of the main worries in the electorate in Peru. But how much is perception and how much is reality? Because we know that crime has grown, but is really a real problem in Peru, or is more just a perception going through a fashion that has been going all through Latin America, that sometimes we are feeling that crime is something terrible, but when you see the numbers, it's not as big as you really think.
Yes, and when you can compare sort of homicide rates in different countries, and Peru, up until relatively recently, has not been, compared with some of the countries of Central America, is been relatively peaceful. But the level of homicides has increased substantially in the last couple of years. It's really been, so it is experience. It is true, and it's certainly the question of perception is certainly there, but the perception is not entirely erroneous.
Right. This is.
With that, I will left to Andrew and Julian to give a final thoughts on that, and we will give you the mic to finish with your views of what is coming, a little bit with an open questions around that. After all what we are seeing in Peru, because probably that's the big question, whoever is going to be the next president, is going to be business as usual, or can we expect certain level of changes following the history of Peru in the last years?
My question, I think, political question, is possibly impossible to answer. We've had 9 presidents in 10 years, and the question is, the new approach, the return to 2 chambers of Congress, is it likely to, if you like, improve those numbers so that we get, 6 or 7 presidents in 10 years? So after that, we need to travel in time, which is impossible, unfortunately.
I mean, I don't really want to make sort of hard and fast projections about what can happen, because everybody one of the things you can say about Peru is that it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Nobody 10 years ago predicted this was going to turn out like this. But my hunch would be, going back to what I said about the way in which the Congress is this is crucial. This is the congressional election is arguably more important than the presidential one. From what I've gathered, and the figures aren't in yet, so it's difficult to make hard and fast projections out of this. But I do think that, at least initially, the parties there will be fewer parties in Congress, and it'll be relatively more difficult. It'll be more difficult to impeach presidents. As I say, it not only has to get a 2/3 majority in one house, you have to get a 2/3 majority in 2, and that makes it a little bit more difficult. So my guess is that maybe we may see the impeachment being used slightly less frequently than has been the case in the past. One of the things that the new, one of the constitutional changes that has been is that the Senate has is in a position where it cannot be closed down. The president cannot close the Congress down. Where in the same way as there were procedures which haven't been actually used, but there were to close down the Chamber of Deputies, which is what happened under Vizcarra in 2019, I think it was.
Right.
My guess would be that maybe maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but maybe what we might see a little bit more stability and slightly less instability, but one could always be wrong.
That's interesting. I think that's an interesting take. I guess maybe you're the specialist. of course, my take, generally speaking, in what we've seen over the past 2 years or so, is this, these flares of instability driven by U.S. interventions across more interventions across the continent, and in relation to China, nothing to do with the country itself and so on, but mostly as a and it seems to me that we see it in Colombia, we saw in Ecuador, we see in Mexico, we see it in Panama, we obviously saw it in Venezuela, we see more in huge support in Argentina. We see some things in Bolivia itself, although it's less visible perhaps. We see it in Brazil in terms of investments, some deals been made and so on, and Chile, of course, and of course you, as you mentioned yourself, Chile and Peru are highly dependent to some extent on the trade with China. But if that is to be disrupted for whatever reason, then that brings instability in itself. And we speculated last time, who leaked the photos of the Chinese businessman having dinner with president of Peru, or whoever it was at the time, but at the same time, when we look at and as you mentioned yourself, when you look at the decoupling between the politics and the economics, the economy is by all standards compared to some of the countries in the region doing pretty well altogether. It's very low debt to GDP. It's the crime rate is very low compared to some of the other countries. The economy is growing quite healthily as well, and given the demand for its core resources, we can expect actually that they should be flying, economically speaking. And then the question is, if there's more stability in the country and everything is going well for them, then we could expect even higher rates of growth for that country.
One of the problems, one of the historic problems, I think, in Peru is that in the way in which the product of growth is distributed, and I think this is one of the things that's created a gap. And the elections show very clearly, to my mind, the divide between a Peru that has benefited quite considerably from growth over the years, particularly in Lima, but other cities as well, and a part of Peru which has been rather neglected by the benefits of growth, where growth has not trickled down and brought many tangible benefits to people. And indeed, in some respects, particularly this is one of the aspects of mining conflicts, has produced actually sort of detrimental effects on local populations. So I think that the gap between the vote for the right and the vote for the left in this last election, and I mean, to quite honestly, the vote for Sanchez is very surprising. I mean, he wasn't somebody who's been out there in the opinion polls at all during the campaign. The vote for Sanchez, who's self-consciously adopted a sort of pro-Castillo position, and Castillo has endorsed his candidacy, and he actually lent him his trademark straw hat to campaign with. That divide between rural Peru and urban Peru, particularly sort of northern Peru and southern Peru, has an electoral component to it, and I think that the results show that. So it's not altogether a sort of happy society, should we say? I mean, not everybody is getting the benefits of growth, and that's one of the big challenges. I mean, how do you distribute the benefits of growth more equitably? And I don't think Peru has cracked that at all yet. And probably, I mean, it's asking perhaps a bit much to do so. Other countries haven't either, but it's an ongoing problem.
Right. This is
definitely it's going to be one of the challenges, not only for the next government, as you say, it's a permanent challenge in Peru, as well as many countries in Latin America. Inequality is definitely one of the biggest problems. But yeah, one of the things that I would like to add of what you're saying, when you see the electoral map of the results so far, you can see this divide. The North, in a way, has been supporting, from what I see in the results, the cause on the North, Fujimori, while in the South, those more negative, or in the Sierras, you can see the support for Sanchez now, that comes a little bit with support for Castillo as well. This clearly differentiation of the regions between rural Peru and urban Peru, you can see in the electoral map, right?
Yeah.
And probably it's going to be one of the biggest challenges, whoever wins the election. Peru will need, in a way, to find some kind of consensus in the future, because I don't think, regardless that the economy has the coupling for the politics, is not immune, and eventually is going to pay some factor to the country that if nothing is done in the future.
Yeah, I mean, there are social divides, regional divides, ethnic divides, and those have been very persistent over time. And that I think is one of the sort of the factors behind, not just this election, but previous elections too.
With this, John, I think we are at the end. I don't know, Andrew or Julian, have any other questions? If not, we'll go to a close. John, once again, thank you very much for being with us. It has been a real pleasure talking to you, have this conversation. We're going to wait for the next publication of your book. Please let us know, because definitely we're going to comment it here, and we would like to have you in another time for another analysis, not only from Peru. You are an expert on the Andean region, so we hope to have you with us more frequently in the future.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.